Greetings everybody. It is to my pleasure to talk to you about the 6 principles behind the Constitution of the United States of America. Like I said, there are 6 principles to the Constitution. These are popular sovereignty, limited government, separation of powers, checks and balances, judicial review, and federalism. Green and Red, along with myself, will be covering what these principles are, where in the Constitution it talks about them, how they apply today, and why it's important to protect these principles even today.
Popular sovereignty is the idea that the power comes from the people. In most cases, this is in the form of citizens voting for either their laws or leaders. The Constitution mentions popular sovereignty a few times. One example in the Constitution is in Article 1, Section 2. It is stated how the people are to vote for the members of the House of Representatives. A recent example of popular sovereignty would be the presidential election. The people voted for the person they wanted to be president. Obviously, popular sovereignty is very important and should never be taken away. If it were, government would be in total control and very bad things would happen.
Limited government is the idea that the government isn't allowed to control every aspect of life. One example in the Constitution is the 9th Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. In other words, just because the government doesn't list all of our rights doesn't mean we don't have them. One example could be, believe it or not, Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a special region of China where the laws are much more relaxed than in mainland China. People are free to work and trade with who they wish. There are no import restrictions, minimum wage, or price fixing. Because of this, Hong Kong has one of the highest standards of living in Asia, second only to Japan and Singapore. Limited government is very important and should not be taken away for the simple fact that if it were, we would have the threat of becoming a dictatorship or becoming communist.
For the motherland.
Separation of powers is the idea that the government should be split into different sections or branches. This prevents there from being one giant single branch of government. Article 1, 2, and 3 as a whole exemplify this idea. Article 1 sets up the legislative branch, Articles 2 sets up the executive branch, and Article 3 sets up the judicial branch. This is also an obviously important aspect of the Constitution. If it were to be taken away, we would have the threat of becoming a dictatorship or becoming communist.
For the motherland. Checks and balances is the system in which the different branches monitor one another in order to prevent one branch from becoming more powerful. For example, the president just can't make a law. Congress has to pass it, then he signs it. However, if the law is unconstitutional, the Supreme Court has the power to declare the law unconstitutional, or invalid. Checks and balances are found mostly in Article 1, 2 and 3 of the Constitution. The best example is in Article 1, Section 7, which describes how a bill can pass between Congress and the President a few times before it becomes law or becomes trash. In 2008, a bill of legislation vetoed by President George W. Bush that would have led to a cut in the pay of Medicare doctors was overridden by Congress. If there were no checks and balances, we would have the threat of becoming a dictatorship or becoming communist. For the motherland.
Judicial review is the ability of the U.S. court system to banish laws that it finds unconstitutional or just plain unethical. Article 3, Section 3 of the Constitution states, the judicial power shall extend to all cases, in law and equity, arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States. It's subtle, but the power of judicial review is written in there. A current example of this is that the Supreme Court is now reviewing a case that will decide if schools can act on suspicion with certain scenarios. If there was no judicial review, we would have the threat of becoming a dictatorship or becoming communist.
For the motherland.
Federalism is where the national and state government work together as one. The 10th Amendment is an example of this in the Constitution. The amendment states that the powers not stated in the Constitution are reserved to the state and the people. An example of this in current-day events is the same-sex marriage movement. There are people who want the right of same-sex marriage added as an amendment to the Constitution so that it will be legal in all states. Federalism is important because without it, we would have the threat of becoming a dictatorship or becoming communist.
For the motherland.